Welcome to day 8 of Revolutionary Actions, Napoleon's Wars. Today will be a little different. We're going to focus on cause and effect and how decisions were made. We're going to examine 3 major decisions Napoleon faced. You're going to write 6 summaries, 3 of your opinions of what you would do if you were Napoleon, and 3 summaries of actual events. Step 1, or question number 1, what should Napoleon do about the revolution in Saint-Domingue? So remember how the French colonies in America were super prosperous and they were using slave labor to grow sugarcane? And remember how the French and the British had fought over those different colonies and those different islands way back in the 7 Years' War, etc., because they were so profitable. Years went by, those colonies continued. And by the time we get to 1794, in the middle of the Reign of Terror in France, the National Assembly outlaws slavery in the French colonies. The ex-slaves, the people of African descent and some Africans themselves, rose up in support of the revolution. These free Black people, these free people of color across Saint-Domingue, rise up in support of liberty, equality, freedom, revolution. When Britain and Spain fought France in Europe, the people of Saint-Domingue fought the British and the Spanish in the islands. Quite near to Saint-Domingue, which is down here, is the other half of the island, Santo Domingo, which is a Spanish colony, and Cuba nearby, which is a Spanish colony, and Jamaica nearby, which is a British colony. Just like the colonies, the British colonies in the 7 Years' War, the people of Saint-Domingue, a colony of France, fought against Britain and Spain as a representation of France in America. And quite similar to the United States, the people of Saint-Domingue started to see themselves as a colony that wanted independence from the mother country. They write their own constitution, they write their own Declaration of Independence in imitation of the United States and in imitation of France itself. The people of Saint-Domingue clearly want to be an independent country. So, what should Napoleon do about this? Napoleon has 2 choices. Option number 1, he can support the revolution for independence. Toussaint Louverture, some people have called the Haitian George Washington, and his new revolutionary government want independence. So if you're Napoleon, should you support them in trying to get independence and lose France's best colony, but gain an amazing ally in America for the French? This will scare the crap out of the other slaveholding nations. It'll scare Britain, it'll scare Spain, and it'll get France an ally that is loyal forever. Or should you take option B and reconquer Saint-Domingue with the French army? Because it's the best colony France has. France needs money, France needs the income, and France is less busy now that they have finished defeating everyone else. And more importantly, or maybe equally importantly, the plan of reconquering Saint-Domingue has the support of the United States of America. Thomas Jefferson is president there now, and he supports the idea of reconquering the colony, reinstating slavery, because the United States, as well as France, are scared that a Black republic, a free republic of African people, will inspire enslaved people in the US and other colonies to rebel. If you were Napoleon, what would you do? If you're watching this on YouTube, you should pause the video now and write your answer and say, I would choose the option to reconquer Saint-Domingue and why, or I would choose the option to support the revolution and independence and why. So now for number 2, I'm going to tell you what actually happened. So I hope you already wrote your summary of what you would do if you were Napoleon. What actually happens is Napoleon decides to invade. He takes an army of 30,000 French soldiers to Saint-Domingue, and quite immediately they start losing. The Africans and African-descended people on Saint-Domingue are many of them veterans of wars in West Africa, like we talked about in the last unit. The Akan, the Asante, or as the English call them, the Coromantee, are veterans of wars in Africa. They are good fighters already. Also, the French have to contend with disease. Our friend the mosquito is here again, just like they were in the American colonies for the American Revolution. Only this time the mosquito is carrying yellow fever instead of malaria. The French die in huge numbers from yellow fever. The black soldiers from West Africa, mostly veterans of wars in Africa, mostly already have survived yellow fever after living in Saint-Domingue for many years. So they are effectively immune to the bites of the mosquito that carry the disease. The other effect that this attack by the French army had is that any members of the population of Saint-Domingue who were opposed to independence, who wanted to stay loyal to France as a colony, changed their minds after seeing intense French brutality and attacks from what they thought of as their mother country. The people who originally wanted to stay French grew to distrust Napoleon's government, and it gave people more resolve to fight for their independence. Eventually, the French were defeated and left Haiti with only 7,000 of their original 30,000 troops in 1803, and in 1804, Haiti declared themselves the Independent Republic of Haiti, the first Black republic in America. Here's our next scenario. Napoleon returns to Europe, and in 1803, he faces a new problem. He faces the hostile threat, which is an alliance between Austria, Russia, and Britain. Austria, here in white, Russia, here in gray, and Britain, here in red, ally together. These three nations together make up some of the biggest, most powerful nations in Europe at the time. Napoleon interprets this as a threat, and so he has to decide what he should do. Napoleon always thinks that the best defense is a good offense, that you should always attack before you get attacked. So, he has a number of options. Option number 1, invade Austria, force Russia to come down and help their ally, fight them both here on Austrian soil, and beat them both in a decisive battle that scares everybody into respecting him again. Option number 2, attack Britain, maybe by taking the French Navy and luring the British out into the Atlantic, looping back around and invading Britain before the British can get back. Option number 3, do both of those at the same time, using the element of surprise. Option number D, embargo all of Europe, draw a little dividing line here to prevent Britain from trading with its allies, and then over time weaken the British because they are really the enemy that Napoleon hates the most. Ruin the British finances and eliminate their ability to fight the French. Or option 5, negotiate for peace and stop fighting these wars all the time. Napoleon doesn't love that idea because it looks weak and it would be demoralizing for the soldiers. So here's the options written out. Negotiate for peace with all the enemies, but that does look weak. Option 4, embargo everybody so Britain can't trade and they lose money. Option number A and B are to invade Austria and Russia at the same time or invade Britain. If you are doing this on the YouTube video, pause the video and write your summary, what you would do if you were Napoleon. Okay, what actually happened? Well, Napoleon tried to do option B, invade Britain. This is going to lead us to the Battle of Trafalgar. So what does he do when he invades Britain? Well, Napoleon takes the French Navy and he sends them out into the Atlantic. And the idea is to loop around and make the British think that they're going to America, and then loop around back to the British Isles and invade before the British arrive back. Instead, what happens is the French Navy leaves, and once they get to the middle of the Atlantic, they get blown south, 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 and they try to come back and they get stuck right here off the coast of Spain. There's a town in Spain right here called Trafalgar. That's why the battle is called that. The British Navy follows them there and traps them there. At the Battle of Trafalgar, as you can see in this picture over here, the French lose big time. The Battle of Trafalgar, the British win. Lord Nelson has one of his biggest victories. Much of the French fleet is sunk or captured. And Napoleon's naval commanders had advised against this. His naval commanders told him it was a bad idea, but Napoleon went ahead with it anyways, and it was a huge loss. So, in typical Napoleon style, he turns around and fights another war. Almost immediately, he turns around and fights in Austria. So France invades Austria, luring Russia over to fight them, and we have the Battle of Austerlitz. At the Battle of Austerlitz, Napoleon is victorious. Napoleon has always done better with strategy on land battles, and he defeats both Austria and Russia together. And, incidentally, along the way, attacks and beats Prussia as well. And in case you've forgotten, Prussia with a P is basically a large part of what is today Germany. So the results of the Battle of Trafalgar is that Napoleon loses. The result of the Battle of Austerlitz is that he wins. He has lost against Britain, but he has defeated 3 other countries, Russia, Austria, and Prussia. This leads Napoleon to actually follow through with the embargo, because now that he's beaten Prussia here, Russia, and Austria, he more or less controls all of the countries in Europe, more or less, except for Portugal. And so he uses the embargo system to draw a line, kind of like this dotted line, around Europe to prevent Britain from trading. So what should Napoleon do about the countries who are violating the continental system? This system is called the continental system. It's an embargo where all of Europe cannot trade with Britain, and Britain cannot trade with all of Europe. The system kind of works. Britain loses 25 to 50% of its income because they're used to doing business with these other countries. However, Britain does still have its colonies. It still has India and a few other places that it can do business with. So it's not going to be a total loss for the British. It is going to be hard on the countries of Europe who rely on British goods. One thing that annoys Napoleon the most is Portugal. Portugal continues to be allies with the British, continues to trade with them, and continues to just ignore the continental system entirely. After a while, Russia decides to ignore this system also and starts doing trade through the Baltic and North Sea up here. And so Britain is trading with Russia, Britain is trading with Portugal, and the continental system has been violated. It has been disrupted. What should Napoleon do? Should he attack Portugal through Spain and on the way take control of Spain and thus gain control of the Mediterranean? Should he attack Russia and force them to follow the embargo against Britain? Should he do both of those at the same time and surprise everybody? Or should he do none of the above because the continental system is clearly not working anyways? Let's look back here. France could go through Spain and attack Portugal. It's a small country, defeat them and extend the embargo. France could go to Russia. We had just beat Russia in the Battle of Austerlitz while also fighting Austria and subsequently Prussia. So it should be fairly easy to defeat Russia. Should France attack Russia and Portugal at the same time? Or should it abandon this whole system and start over? If you're doing this on YouTube, I recommend you pause and predict which thing you think he should do and why. This brings us to our last summary. What happens in Portugal, Spain, and Russia? If you guessed do all of the above, or rather do A and B, you were right. In 1807, 1808, Napoleon invades Portugal by going through Spain. However, through a combination of poor planning and ego, many of his soldiers got heat sickness, heat stroke, died of exposure, etc. Out of his 25,000 starting out soldiers, only 2,000 of them survived by the time they got to Lisbon. They did occupy Spain as planned. However, the Spanish people rebelled against French occupation. Spain had been a loyal ally of France, but under French occupation, the Spanish people rebelled and started doing small attacks against the French soldiers, tactics that we now call guerrilla warfare in English, meaning small wars. The battles in Portugal and Spain known together as the Peninsular Wars, lasted until 1814. It lasted a total of 7 years, and hundreds of thousands of French troops died in the process. There are tons of stories of horrible atrocities happening, villages being burned, soldiers getting sawed in half, people getting tortured. It's just awful. So, what did Napoleon do in the midst of all this loss and disruption? He turns and in 1812 attacks Russia. Russia uses the strategy of continual retreat. They fight a battle, Napoleon wins, the Russians retreat. They fight another battle, Napoleon wins, the Russians retreat. And eventually, Napoleon finds himself all the way at Moscow. Napoleon's soldiers even capture Moscow, but Russia still does not surrender. The Russians burn down the city of Moscow, and Napoleon and his troops are forced to retreat all the way back to France. He started out with 600,000 men, one of the largest armies in history, and by the time he gets back home to France, he's down to 27,000. You can see here, he makes his way from France all the way over here, retreat, 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 some major battles at Minsk and Smolensk, and gets to Moscow and then has to retreat all the way back to France. Once you've submitted your summaries, the follow-up to this assignment is the video on History Buffs. It's a summary of the movie Waterloo.